Serafina Voss commanded her penthouse office on the 53rd floor of Manhattan's gleaming financial district like a monarch presiding over a hard-won empire. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls framed a city that had witnessed her rise from a shattered single mother to the formidable CEO of Voss Enterprises. This consulting titan reshaped global corporations. At 34, she wielded power that silenced boardrooms, wealth that erased doubts, and a reputation that struck like a storm's first gust. The evening skyline sparkled beyond her mahogany desk, strewn with contracts that could topple industries and strategies that rewrote fortunes. Her assistant had cleared her schedule, sensing the need for solitude when Serafina's gaze turned inward, her mind a fortress of precision. Every facet of her world was orchestrated, risks anticipated, threats neutralized, outcomes engineered. So, her pulse quickened when a cream-colored envelope appeared on her desk, its wax seal gleaming like a warning. The calligraphy bore the name Isadora Langley, a specter from a past Serafina had buried beneath ambition's weight. They had been inseparable at Yale, sharing dreams in a cramped dorm, forging a bond she once thought unbreakable. Time, however, had taught Serafina that some friendships were chess games, each move a calculated probe for weakness. The envelope was no mere invitation. It was a gauntlet, thrown with cruel elegance. Heavy cardstock, embossed with gold, whispered of wealth wielded like a blade. The words within halted her breath. Isadora Langley and Elias Warwick request your presence. Elias Warwick. The name struck like lightning, unearthing memories of a man who had been her sanctuary and ruin. The entrepreneur whose brilliance matched hers, whose love promised eternity, and whose departure left her clutching a newborn secret. "Mommy, why do you look so pale?" Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, stood in the doorway, her school blazer pristine despite a day of classes. Lyra's eyes, sharp with uncanny perception, mirrored her father's, Elias's, piercing green, though he had never known the child he left behind. Serafina smoothed her expression, a skill honed in corporate battles. "Just a letter, Starlight. How was school?" She deflected with a negotiator's ease, but her mind raced, dissecting the invitation's intent with surgical precision. This was no coincidence. Isadora had not stumbled into Elias's orbit at a gala. Serafina's instincts, sharpened by years of outmaneuvering rivals, screamed of a calculated strike. She recalled Isadora's probing questions during a lunch 2 years prior, casual inquiries about Lyra's father, veiled as nostalgia. "Your old flame is a billionaire now, is he not?" Isadora had mused, her tone light but her eyes predatory. "Still unattached. You should reach out." Serafina had dismissed it as gossip then. Now, she saw it for what it was, reconnaissance. With her marketing degree and chameleon-like charm, Isadora had orchestrated a 3-year campaign to claim Elias. She had mined Serafina's confidences, every shared memory of Elias's dreams, fears, and vulnerabilities, and turned them into weapons. The invitation was not a gesture but a taunt, a gilded proclamation of victory. Serafina's fingers traced the embossed text. Harrington Manor, Saturday, 2 weeks hence. The venue, a sprawling estate synonymous with old-world opulence, promised a spectacle of excess. Isadora's coronation as Elias's wife would be a performance for the ages. Lyra perched on a chair by the desk, her homework spread with a precision that echoed her mother's. Her focus was intense, solving equations far beyond her peers, a gift of intellect Serafina knew came from Elias, though Lyra had never met him. "Are we going somewhere special?" Lyra asked, sensing the shift in her mother's demeanor. Serafina's lips curved into a smile, devoid of warmth. "Yes, Starlight. A very special event." She had not built an empire by shying from conflict. If Isadora wanted to flaunt her triumph, Serafina would meet her on that battlefield, not as a victim of past betrayals, but as the titan she had become. The invitation demanded her presence, and she would deliver, not alone, but with Lyra, the living proof of a truth Elias had never faced. Serafina reached for her phone, crafting her RSVP with the calm of a general plotting a siege. The city pulsed below, indifferent to the storm brewing in her heart. Isadora's victory lap would be spectacular, but Serafina knew spectacles could crumble. She had spent 6 years forging armor from pain, and if Isadora thought she could summon her to witness defeat, she would soon learn the cost of underestimating a woman who had turned betrayal into power. "Are you mad, Mommy?" Lyra's voice cut through her thoughts, her perception unnervingly sharp. "No, Starlight," Serafina replied, her tone steady as steel. "Anger clouds judgment. We do not get mad, we get strategic." She pulled Lyra close, her daughter's warmth grounding her resolve. This was not just a wedding, it was a reckoning. Isadora had planned her ascent with precision, but Serafina was no pawn. She was a queen, and queens did not lose, they reshaped the board. Serafina's mind turned to the days ahead as the sun sank below the skyline, casting shadows across her office. 2 weeks to prepare, to hone her presence into a weapon as sharp as Isadora's ambition. She would walk into Harrington Manor not as a guest, but as a force, with Lyra at her side, a reminder of the life Elias had abandoned. The invitation lay on her desk, its gold lettering catching the last light like a dare. Serafina met it with a gaze that could shatter glass. Let Isadora savor her moment. The real performance was yet to come. The morning of Isadora Langley's wedding dawned with a crystalline brilliance that only wealth could orchestrate. Harrington Manor sprawled across acres of manicured splendor, its Gothic arches and ivy-clad towers standing as a testament to ambition realized. Every detail, from the cascading roses to the crystal chandeliers, proclaimed Isadora's ascent to the pinnacle of tech royalty. The air hummed with anticipation, a stage set for a performance that would echo through social circles and headlines. Serafina Voss arrived in a sleek obsidian Bentley, its understated elegance a quiet rebuke to the ostentation around her. She had spent the past 2 weeks preparing with the precision of a general before battle, treating the wedding like a corporate takeover requiring flawless execution. Her gown, a deep sapphire silk sculpted by a Parisian couturier, hugged her frame with regal authority. It was not flashy but commanding, designed to make others question their choices. Her presence was a statement, a reminder that power needed no fanfare to dominate. Lyra sat beside her in the car, a vision of quiet grace in a dress mirrored her mother's elegance. At 6, she carried an innate poise that drew eyes, her dark hair styled to accentuate features that held both her mother's resolve and her father's intensity. Her green eyes, so like Elias's, sparkled with curiosity as she took in the manor's grandeur. "It looks like a castle from my storybooks," Lyra said, her voice steady with a child's unfiltered wonder. Serafina's lips twitched. Castles often hide secrets in starlight. Be watchful. The circular drive buzzed with arriving guests, their luxury vehicles a parade of wealth. Serafina's gaze cataloged the scene with a strategist's precision. Tech moguls, venture capitalists, and media tycoons mingled, each chosen to cement Isadora's new status. The guest list was a calculated mosaic, every name a stepping stone in her campaign for social dominion. "This is not a wedding," Serafina murmured as their driver parked. "It is a coronation disguised as love." Inside, the manor's ballroom had been transformed into a cathedral of opulence. White silk draped the ceilings, flowers spilled from every surface, and candles flickered like a constellation brought to earth. The excess was breathtaking, a display that demanded awe rather than earned it. Serafina moved through the crowd with the fluid grace of a woman who belonged everywhere. Whispers trailed her, "Daphne Voss is here," laced with respect and a hint of fear. Her reputation preceded her, a force that shifted the room's gravity. Lyra stayed close, her sharp eyes noting details most adults missed. "Why are people staring at Mommy?" she asked as they reached their seats, her voice low but clear. "Because power draws attention, Starlight," Serafina replied, settling into a chair with the composure of royalty. "People watch to see if we are worthy of it." Their seats, strategically placed near the altar, offered a clear view of the stage where Isadora's triumph would unfold. Surrounding them were industry giants, their presence a testament to the event's weight. The musicians struck up a processional, a swell of classical notes chosen for prestige over passion. The crowd rose, a choreographed wave, but Serafina lingered a moment longer, her delay a subtle defiance of the scripted spectacle. When she stood, it was with a grace that made her gown seem like armor. Lyra mirrored her small frame radiating a quiet dignity that turned heads. "Are you excited to see the bride?" Lyra asked, her curiosity bright. "I am curious to see her performance," Serafina said, her tone layered with meaning too complex for a child to unravel. The music crescendoed, heralding Isadora's entrance. She appeared at the doorway, a vision in a gown that shimmered with silk and lace, its train a flowing river requiring attendants to manage. Diamonds glittered at her throat, catching the light like captured stars. Her smile was radiant, but to Serafina's trained eye, it was the smile of a conqueror, not a lover. Isadora glided down the aisle, her gaze sweeping the crowd with calculated precision, acknowledging power players with nods and offering dazzling smiles to media figures whose coverage would seal her transformation. When her eyes met Serafina's, the mask slipped fleetingly. A glint of vicious triumph flickered, a silent message: "I have won." The look was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by bridal radiance, but it confirmed what Serafina already knew. This invitation was no gesture of friendship. It was a calculated strike, meant to force her to witness the theft of a life she might have had. "She is beautiful," Lyra observed, her tone matter of fact, unaware of the psychological warfare unfolding. "Beauty can hide thorns," Serafina replied, her voice steady as steel. The ceremony began with the polished efficiency of a production backed by limitless wealth. The officiant's words were crafted for impact, every gesture rehearsed to perfection. But Serafina's attention was on Elias, who stood at the altar, a figure of masculine perfection refined by success. His tailored tuxedo fit his tall frame like a second skin, his dark hair flecked with silver that added gravitas. Yet his eyes, those piercing green eyes that once held her world, were distant, walled off by years of ambition and loss. When their gazes met across the sea of flowers, time collapsed. Serafina saw recognition flare in Elias's expression, followed by confusion and longing. For 3 heartbeats, his composure shattered, his hand twitching toward his chest in a gesture she remembered from their past, a reflex when emotions overwhelmed him. The billionaire vanished, replaced by the man who had once whispered her name like a vow. "Mommy, why does he look sad?" Lyra whispered, her insight cutting through the pageantry. "Some choices look perfect, but feel hollow." Serafina said her words for Lyra softly, but aimed at Elias's fracturing facade. His responses to the officiant were mechanical, his vows delivered with the flat precision of a business deal. "Do you, Elias, take Isadora to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The officiant's voice rang out. "I do," Elias said, but the words lacked life, a stark contrast to the passionate dreamer Serafina had loved. Isadora's smile faltered, her grip on her bouquet tightening as she sensed the void in his voice. "Isadora, do you take Elias to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The officiant continued. "I do," Isadora replied, her voice brimming with triumph, as if claiming a prize won through years of strategy. The kiss that sealed their union was brief, dutiful, lacking the fire of genuine connection. As they turned to face the crowd, Elias's gaze sought Serafina again, his expression a tangle of unspoken questions. The applause was thunderous, orchestrated by wealth and expectation, but Serafina saw the cracks in the performance. Isadora had won her prize, but it was a hollow victory, built on a man whose heart was elsewhere. "Are we going to talk to them?" Lyra asked as the crowd moved toward the reception. "Soon starlight," Serafina said, her voice carrying the calm of a storm's eye. "First, we let them bask in their moment." She stood, her presence a quiet command that parted the crowd. Isadora had played her hand, but Serafina was no spectator. She was a queen, and this wedding was merely the opening move in a game Isadora would soon regret starting. As they stepped into the reception's gilded chaos, Serafina's mind was already mapping the board, ready to turn triumph into reckoning. The reception at Harrington Manor unfolded like a Renaissance court, its opulence a calculated display of Isadora Langley's triumph. Gold leaf adorned the walls, Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across tables laden with delicacies that cost more than most people's monthly wages. The air thrummed with the clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of power brokers, each guest a cog in the machine of Isadora's social ascent. Serafina Voss navigated this glittering maze with the ease of a predator in her element, her sapphire gown a beacon of understated authority amidst the ostentatious splendor. Lyra clung to her mother's side, her green eyes absorbing the scene with a quiet intensity that belied her 6 years. Her dress, a miniature echo of Serafina's, drew admiring glances from guests who recognized the rare poise of a child raised in the shadow of power. "Why is everything so shiny, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her voice cutting through the din with innocent clarity. "Because some people think shine equals strength and starlight," Serafina replied, her tone low but sharp. "But true strength needs no decoration." The crowd parted as Serafina moved, their deference a silent acknowledgement of her stature. Tech titans paused mid-conversation, venture capitalists offered nods of respect, and socialites whispered her name with a mix of awe and envy. "Serafina Voss is here," one voice murmured, the words carrying the weight of a headline. "Her firm secured the Hawthorne account," another added, oblivious to the deeper currents swirling beneath the evening's surface. Serafina's presence was a ripple that disrupted the carefully curated harmony of Isadora's production. She strategically positioned Lyra at a table near the center to observe the room's dynamics. The seating chart was a masterclass in social engineering, placing Serafina among industry giants whose decisions shaped markets. She noted the faces: a media mogul whose editorials swayed public opinion, a financier whose investments could cripple economies, a tech innovator whose patents were worth billions. Isadora had assembled a court to witness her coronation, but Serafina saw it for what it was: a gilded cage built to trap Elias Warwick in a life of her design. Across the room, Elias stood beside his new wife, his tailored tuxedo accentuating a frame honed by years of relentless ambition. His silver-flecked hair and sharp jawline made him a figure of magnetic allure. Yet his eyes betrayed a restlessness that no amount of wealth could mask. He accepted congratulations with practiced charm, but his gaze drifted, searching the crowd until it locked onto Serafina. The intensity of his stare was a silent plea, a crack in the facade of the perfect groom. "Why does he keep looking at us?" Lyra asked, her small hand tightening in Serafina's. "Because some truths cannot be ignored, Starlight," Serafina said, her voice steady but laced with steel. She met Elias's gaze without flinching, her expression a fortress that revealed nothing of the storm within. 5 years ago, he had been her world, his promises of forever a beacon in her darkest days. Now, he was a stranger bound to another, yet the pull between them was undeniable, a thread of history that refused to snap. His hand twitched, a gesture she remembered from nights when his passion outstripped his control, and for a moment, the billionaire vanished, replaced by the man who had once loved her. Isadora, radiant in her diamond-encrusted gown, was deep in conversation with a cluster of tech industry wives, her laughter a calculated melody designed to charm. But Serafina caught the flicker of her glance, the way her eyes darted toward Elias, tracking his distraction. The bride's smile tightened, and a hairline fractured in her perfect performance. She knew, she sensed the fault line in her victory, the unspoken connection that threatened to unravel her carefully woven triumph. "Serafina Voss, what an unexpected pleasure." A voice broke her focus, and she turned to face Victor Langley, Isadora's father, a manufacturing magnate whose empire rivaled her own. His approach was cautious, his smile polished but wary, as if he sensed the danger in engaging a woman of Serafina's caliber. "Congratulations on your daughter's wedding, Victor," Serafina said, her tone a precise balance of warmth and authority. "It is a spectacle worthy of her ambition." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the layered meaning in her words. "We are proud of Isadora," he said, his voice smooth but probing. "Though I admit I was surprised to see you here. Old college friends, yes, but that was years ago." Serafina's smile was a blade, sharp and controlled, Some bonds resurface at the most opportune moments. She replied, her words a riddle that left Victor searching for hidden intent. I would not miss this for anything. Their exchange was a dance of power, each word measured to convey respect without yielding ground. Lyra watched, her sharp mind cataloging the interaction with a child's unerring instinct for tension. And this must be your daughter, Victor said, his gaze softening as it fell on Lyra. She is remarkable. What is her name? Lyra, the girl answered, her voice clear and confident. I am 6 and I go to Crestwood Academy. The name of the elite school landed like a quiet bombshell, signaling wealth and influence that matched Victor's own. Impressive, Victor said, genuine respect flickering in his eyes. Crestwood shapes future leaders. He paused, assessing Serafina with renewed caution. Your daughter has your strength. Serafina's smile was faint but deliberate. She has her father's eyes too, she said, letting the words hang, watching Victor's expression shift with the dawning realization of Elias's unmistakable green gaze reflected in Lyra. Before Victor could respond, a shadow fell across their table. Elias approached, his steps purposeful but unsteady, as if drawn by a force he could not resist. Excuse me, Victor, he said, his voice tight and barely containing emotion. May I speak with Serafina for a moment? Business matters. The excuse was flimsy, and Victor's raised brow confirmed he saw through it, but he stepped back with diplomatic grace. Of course, he said, retreating into the crowd. Another time, Serafina. The air thickened as Elias faced Serafina, Lyra standing between them like a living bridge to their shared past. Serafina. He said her name was a raw wound in his throat. I did not know you would be here. Isadora never said. His eyes flicked to Lyra, and the recognition that struck him was a visible blow, shattering the last of his composure. The timeline was clear, and the resemblance was undeniable. My God, he whispered, his voice breaking, is she your daughter? Serafina finished, her words precise and cutting. Her name is Lyra. She is 6 and has never needed a father who did not know she existed. Elias staggered, his hand gripping the back of a chair. I did not know, he said, desperation creeping into his tone. If I had, I would have stayed. I would have fought for you both. Serafina's gaze was ice, her voice a whip. Convenient that you find fatherhood appealing now at your wedding to another, she said, each word a calculated strike. You left Elias. You chose ambition over us. Lyra's hand tightened in hers, sensing the storm. Why is he sad, Mommy? She asked, her voice small but piercing. Because some choices break more than hearts, Starlight. Serafina said, her eyes never leaving Elias. They break futures. And as she spoke, she knew this moment was only the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape them all. The reception at Harrington Manor pulsed with orchestrated grandeur, a glittering tapestry of wealth and ambition, woven to crown Isadora Langley as tech royalty. The ballroom's golden glow reflected off crystal goblets and polished silver, each detail a testament to her meticulous campaign. Serafina Voss stood at the edge of this spectacle, her sapphire gown a quiet declaration of power amidst the ostentatious display. She was no guest here, she was a force, her presence a subtle challenge to the carefully curated narrative unfolding around her. Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, stood close, her green eyes, Elias Warwick's eyes, scanning the room with a child's unerring perception. Her dress, a delicate echo of her mother's elegance, drew admiring glances, but her focus was on the tension radiating from Serafina. Mommy, why is everyone pretending to be happy? Lyra asked, her voice low but piercing, cutting through the clatter of champagne flutes. Some people wear joy as a costume, like Starlight. Serafina replied, her tone steady but edged with steel. It hides what they cannot face. The crowd swirled around them, a constellation of power brokers, tech moguls, financiers, media tycoons, each chosen to witness Isadora's triumph. Serafina's presence sent ripples through their ranks, her reputation as Voss Enterprises' CEO a magnet for whispered speculation. She is expanding into European markets. One guest murmured, unaware of the deeper drama unfolding. Her influence is unmatched. Another added, their tone laced with the deference reserved for those who reshaped industries. Serafina catalogued their words, her mind a chessboard where every move was calculated. Elias Warwick stood across the room, his tailored tuxedo framing a figure refined by years of relentless ambition. At 35, he embodied success, his silver-flecked hair and sharp jawline commanding attention. Yet his eyes, those piercing green eyes that once held Serafina's dreams, were clouded with a restlessness that betrayed his perfect facade. He moved through congratulations with mechanical grace, but his gaze returned to Serafina and Lyra, a silent question burning in his expression. His new wife, Isadora, glittered beside him, her diamond-encrusted gown a beacon of victory, but her smile tightened each time she caught his distraction. Serafina met Elias's stare with unflinching calm, her face a fortress that revealed nothing of the storm within. 5 years ago, he had been her sanctuary, his promises of forever a lifeline through her darkest days. Now, he was a stranger bound to another. Yet the pull between them was a live wire, sparking with unspoken history. Lyra's hand tightened in hers, sensing the undercurrent. "Why does he look at us like he is lost?" Lyra asked, her insight slicing through the pageantry. "Because some paths lead to places you cannot return from, Starlight," Serafina said, her voice a blade honed by years of survival. The conversation with Victor Langley, Isadora's father, lingered in her mind. His cautious respect had been a reminder of the stakes. His manufacturing empire was a rival to her own, and his daughter's marriage to Elias was a strategic alliance. But Serafina's revelation about Lyra's eyes had planted a seed of doubt, a crack in his polished composure. She knew he would dissect her words later, piecing together the implications of Elias's unrecognized daughter. She let the moment simmer for now, a quiet weapon in her arsenal. Elias's approach was inevitable, his steps cutting through the crowd with a desperation that belied his polished exterior. Serafina braced herself, her heart a fortress against the man who had once been her world. "Excuse me," he said, his voice taut as he reached her, ignoring the curious glances from nearby guests. "Serafina, I need to speak with you. Alone." His eyes flicked to Lyra, and the recognition that struck him was a visible blow, his hand trembling as it gripped the back of a chair. The timeline was undeniable, and the resemblance was a mirror he could not escape. "This is not the place, Elias," Serafina said, her tone arctic, each word a deliberate barrier. "Your wife might object to private conversations on her wedding day." His jaw tightened, but he pressed forward, his voice low and raw. "I did not know about her, about Lyra. If I had, I would have stayed. I would have fought for you both." His words were a plea but landed like sparks on dry tinder, igniting Serafina's carefully banked fury. "How convenient," she said, her voice a whip that cut through his desperation. "You discover fatherhood at your wedding to another. You left Elias. You chose ambition over us. You did not even look back to see what you left behind." Lyra's small hand tightened in hers, her green eyes wide as she watched the exchange. "Mommy, why is he crying?" she asked, her voice a quiet arrow that pierced the tension. "Because some truths hurt more than lies, Starlight," Serafina replied, her gaze never leaving Elias. "I was manipulated," Elias said, his words tumbling in a rush to bridge the chasm of 5 years. "Isadora fed me lies. She said you had moved on, and that contacting you would hurt you more. I believed her, because I was a fool." His admission was raw, but Serafina's expression remained unyielding, a queen unmoved by a supplicant's pleas. "Poor Elias," she said, her tone laced with mock sympathy that cut deeper than anger. "So easily swayed by a woman with a marketing degree and a predator's instincts. What does that say about your judgment?" Lyra watched, her sharp mind processing the exchange with a child's clarity. "Why is he sad at his own wedding, Mommy?" she asked again, her voice a soft echo of the question that hung over the moment. "Because some cages are built with promises instead of bars." Serafina said her words for Lyra, but aimed at Elias's fracturing resolve. He sank to his knees, his tuxedo forgotten, bringing himself to Lyra's level, desperately trying to connect. But Serafina stepped between them, her movement swift and absolute, a lioness guarding her cub. "Do not," she said, her voice a command that silenced the hum of the reception. "You do not get to claim her now, not after abandoning her before she was born." Elias's eyes glistened, his voice breaking. "I did not know. How can I be blamed for what I did not know?" Serafina's gaze was ice, her words relentless. "Because a real man would have checked, a birth father would have cared enough to find out. You chose the easy path, and now you face the consequences." Her words were a verdict, backed by 5 years of raising Lyra alone. Every sleepless night, every milestone, every sacrifice. Elias's desperation was palpable, but it was his own, not Lyra's. "I can change," he said, his voice a drowning man's gasp. "I can be the father she deserves. I have the wealth to influence everything she could need." Serafina's smile was a blade, cold and final. "She has everything Starlight needs, a mother who never faltered, a home where she is cherished, and an education that will shape her future. What could you add but chaos?" Elias's shoulders slumped, his gaze locked on Lyra, who stood silent, her hand in Serafina's. "She is my daughter too." He said the words were hollow and had legal weight rather than emotional truth. Serafina's eyes flashed with a fury that made the air crackle. "Try it," she said, her voice a quiet storm. "Test me, Elias, and see what happens when you challenge a mother who has built an empire from betrayal's ashes." As she led Lyra away, leaving Elias kneeling in the gilded chaos, she felt the cold satisfaction of a queen who had just drawn first blood. The gardens of Harrington Manor shimmered under the evening sky, their manicured perfection a stark contrast to the raw confrontation unfolding near a marble fountain. Water cascaded in crystalline arcs, its music a soft counterpoint to the tension between Serafina Voss and Elias Warwick. The reception's golden glow spilled from the ballroom, illuminating the faces of guests who cast curious glances but kept their distance, sensing a storm they dared not approach. Serafina stood resolute, her sapphire gown catching the moonlight, a queen defending her kingdom against an intruder from her past. Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, stood at her side, her green eyes, Elias's eyes, wide with a child's intuitive grasp of the moment's weight. Her small hand gripped Serafina's, seeking the anchor of her mother's unyielding strength. The air was thick with the scent of roses and the distant hum of celebration. But in this garden pocket, time seemed suspended, holding only the 3 of them: a mother, a child, and a man grappling with truths he had never faced. Elias knelt on the grass, his tailored tuxedo forgotten, his face a map of desperation and regret. "Please, Serafina," he said, his voice raw with emotion he could no longer contain. "I need to explain. I never knew about her. If I had, I would have stayed." His words were a plea, but they struck Serafina like sparks against steel, igniting nothing but the cold resolve she had forged over 5 years of raising Lyra alone. Her expression was a fortress, impenetrable, revealing none of the pain that still lingered beneath her armor. "You would have stayed," she repeated, her tone laced with a scorn that cut deeper than anger. "How noble of you to discover devotion to another woman at your wedding. How convenient that fatherhood calls now, when it comes with no sacrifice, no sleepless nights, no battles fought alone." Her words were precise, each a calculated strike aimed at the heart of his newfound paternal awakening. Elias flinched, his green eyes glistening, but he pressed on, driven by a need to bridge the chasm his absence had carved. "I was deceived," he said, his voice breaking as he rose to his feet, his hands outstretched as if to grasp a truth slipping away. "Isadora wove a web of lies. She told me you had moved on and wanted nothing to do with me. I believed her because I was lost without you." Serafina's gaze remained arctic, her posture unyielding. "Poor Elias," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy that stung like a lash. "So easily swayed by a woman with a marketing degree and a predator's cunning. What does that say about the man you have become?" Lyra's hand tightened in hers, her small frame tensing at the storm of words. "Mommy, why is he so upset?" she asked, her voice a quiet thread weaving through the tension. "Because some truths come too late, Starlight," Serafina replied, her tone softening for her daughter but retaining its edge for Elias. "Some choices build walls that cannot be climbed." She stepped closer to Lyra, her body a shield, her presence a warning that no amount of regret could breach. Elias's gaze locked on Lyra, his daughter's resemblance to him undeniable. Her sharp cheekbones, piercing eyes, the unconscious grace that marked her as his legacy. "She is mine too," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and desperation. "I have rights, Serafina. The courts would see that." The threat was a misstep, and Serafina's eyes flashed with a fury that could silence boardrooms. "Try it," she said, her voice a quiet menace that made the air shiver. "Test me, Elias, and learn what happens when you challenge a mother who has built an empire from the ashes of your betrayal." Her words were a gauntlet, thrown with the precision of a woman who had faced down corporate titans and emerged victorious. She had spent 5 years transforming pain into power, every sleepless night with Lyra, every milestone celebrated alone, forging an unbreakable resolve. Elias stepped back, his face paling as he registered the depth of her strength. "I can change," he said, his desperation raw. "I can be the father she deserves. I have wealth and influence to give her. Lyra has everything she needs." Serafina said, her voice final, a verdict delivered from a throne of hard-won authority. "A mother who has never failed her, a home where she is cherished, an education that will shape her into a force of her own. What could you offer but disruption and disappointment?" Her words were a wall, built not of anger but of certainty, each one a brick laid through years of raising Lyra alone. Elias's shoulders slumped, his gaze dropping to the grass as if searching for answers it could not provide. "Mommy, is he going to stay sad forever?" Lyra asked, her voice small but piercing, her green eyes searching her mother's face. "Not forever, Starlight," Serafina said, her tone gentle but firm. "But some lessons take time to learn." She knelt briefly, meeting Lyra's gaze, her hand brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. The gesture was tender, a reminder of the bond that had sustained them through every storm. Elias watched, his expression fracturing further, as if seeing the depth of their connection only deepened his loss. "I did not abandon her," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, more to himself than to Serafina. "I did not know. How can I be blamed for what I did not know?" Serafina rose, her gaze unrelenting. "Because you chose to walk away," she said, each word a measured blow. "You chose ambition over connection. A real man would have checked. A birth father would have cared enough to find out. Her authority was absolute, earned through every sacrifice, every tear shed in the dark, every victory won without him." The reception's music drifted through the garden, a mocking reminder of the celebration Elias was meant to be part of. Isadora's laughter rang out from the ballroom, sharp and performative, but Serafina knew she was watching, her triumph tainted by the fracture in her groom's attention. Elias's gaze lingered on Lyra, a desperate hunger in his eyes, but Serafina's presence was a barrier he could not cross. "Do not think you can walk into her life now," she said, her voice low and lethal. "You made your choice, and now you live with it." She took Lyra's hand, guiding her back toward the ballroom, leaving Elias alone by the fountain. His figure was a silhouette against the golden light, a man caught in the wreckage of his own decisions. "Come, Starlight," Serafina said, her voice steady as they re-entered the glittering chaos. "Let us congratulate the bride on her victory." The words were laced with a promise that Isadora's triumph was merely the prelude to a reckoning Serafina would deliver with surgical precision. As they stepped into the ballroom, the crowd's eyes followed, sensing the shift in the air. Serafina's presence was a quiet storm, her every move a declaration that she was no mere guest. Isadora stood across the room, her diamond-encrusted gown catching the light. But her smile wavered as she caught sight of Serafina and Lyra. The game was far from over, and Serafina was ready to play, her fortress of solitude unbreached, her resolve a weapon sharpened by years of survival. Harrington Manor's ballroom pulsed with the orchestrated celebration's rhythm, its gilded splendor a stage for Isadora Langley's meticulously crafted triumph. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across tables laden with delicacies, each detail a testament to her ascent into the elite echelons of tech royalty. Serafina Voss moved through this glittering chaos with the grace of a panther, her sapphire gown a silent declaration of power that outshone the room's excess. She was no guest in this spectacle. She was a force, and her presence was a subtle challenge to the narrative Isadora had woven. Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, walked beside her, her green eyes, Elias Warwick's eyes, scanning the crowd with a child's sharp curiosity. Her dress, a delicate mirror of her mother's elegance, drew admiring glances, but her focus was on the undercurrents of tension she sensed in Serafina's poised frame. "Why do people keep whispering about us, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her voice clear, despite the hum of conversation. "Because we are a mystery, Starlight," Serafina replied, her tone calm but edged with steel. "And mysteries unsettle those who crave control." The crowd parted as Serafina advanced, their deference a silent acknowledgement of her stature. Tech moguls paused, venture capitalists offered nods, and socialites murmured her name with reverence and unease. "Serafina Voss is here." One voice whispered, the words carrying the weight of a revelation. "Her firm is redefining global markets," another added, oblivious to the deeper drama unfolding beneath the surface. Serafina's presence was a ripple that disrupted the carefully choreographed harmony of Isadora's coronation. She guided Lyra to a vantage point near the dance floor, where the room's power dynamics played out in every glance and gesture. The guest list was a strategic mosaic. Media tycoons whose pens shaped narratives, financiers whose decisions moved markets, and tech innovators whose patents fueled empires. Isadora had assembled a court to witness her victory. Still, Serafina saw it for what it was, a dance of motives, each participant a player in a game of ambition and influence. "This is not a celebration," she murmured to herself. "It is a transaction dressed in silk." Across the room, Isadora stood radiant in her diamond-encrusted gown, her laughter a calculated melody designed to charm. A cluster of industry wives surrounded her, their smiles as polished as the crystal flutes in their hands. But her gaze darted toward Elias, who stood apart, his tailored tuxedo framing a figure taut with unrest. His silver-flecked hair and sharp jawline made him a magnet for attention. Yet his eyes betrayed a fracture, searching the crowd until they found Serafina and Lyra. The intensity of his stare was a silent confession, a crack in the facade of the perfect groom. Serafina met his gaze with unflinching calm, her expression a fortress that concealed the storm within. 5 years ago, Elias had been her anchor, his promises of forever a light in her darkest hours. Now, he was a stranger bound to another, yet the pull between them was undeniable, a thread of history that refused to break. "Why does he look so alone, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her small hand tightening in Serafina's, her insight piercing the pageantry. "Because some choices leave you adrift in starlight," Serafina said, her voice steady but laced with purpose. Isadora's smile faltered as she caught Elias's distraction, her fingers tightening around her champagne flute. She moved toward him, her gown shimmering like a weapon, and placed a proprietary hand on his arm. The gesture was subtle but deliberate, a claim staked before the watching crowd. But Elias's attention remained fractured, his gaze returning to Serafina, a silent question burning in his green eyes. Isadora's expression hardened, a flicker of doubt betraying her triumphant facade. She knew the stage was slipping from her control. "Serafina Voss, what a delight to see you." A voice interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to face Margaret Hale, the wife of a venture capitalist whose investments could make or break empires. Her smile was warm but calculating, her eyes assessing Serafina's gown with a mix of envy and respect. "That dress is exquisite," she said, her tone carrying the weight of social currency. "Custom, I presume." "Naturally," Serafina replied, her voice smooth as silk. "Special occasions demand singular choices." The compliment was a probe, and Serafina's response a subtle assertion of her place in this rarefied sphere. Margaret's gaze shifted to Lyra, her expression softening. "Your daughter is stunning," she said, genuine warmth breaking through her polished veneer. "Those eyes are extraordinary." Serafina's smile was faint but deliberate. "She inherited her father's eyes," she said, letting the words linger, watching as Margaret's expression shifted with the realization of Elias's unmistakable green gaze reflected in Lyra. The music swelled, signaling the first dance, and the crowd turned to watch Isadora and Elias take the floor. Isadora glided into his arms, her movements rehearsed to perfection, her smile a beacon of victory. But Elias's steps were mechanical, his touch devoid of the passion a bride might expect. The crowd applauded, cameras flashing to capture the moment for posterity. Still, Serafina saw the truth. This was no union of hearts, but a performance, a contract sealed in public view. "Why do they dance like they are acting?" Lyra whispered, her sharp mind catching the dissonance. "Because some promises are made for others to see starlight." Serafina replied, her voice low but firm. She watched Isadora's calculated grace. Her eyes scanned the crowd for approval, and Elias's distant gaze, which drifted back to her and Lyra. The dance was a microcosm of their marriage, a spectacle of ambition, not love. As the music faded, Isadora lingered in Elias's arms, her smile a mask that could not hide her awareness of his detachment. She led him toward a group of media moguls, her laughter bright but brittle, a performer clinging to her role. Elias followed, but his eyes sought Serafina again, a silent plea that she met with icy resolve. The moment was interrupted by a new voice. "Serafina, my dear, you came," Isadora said, gliding toward them, her gown a cascade of light, her smile a blade disguised as warmth. "I would not miss your moment of triumph, Isadora," Serafina said, her tone smooth but laced with steel. The words were a challenge, and Isadora's smile tightened, her eyes flicking to Lyra with a flicker of calculation. "And this must be your daughter," she said, her voice syrupy but sharp. "She is exquisite." Lyra met her gaze with unflinching calm. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice clear. "I am 6, and I go to Crestwood Academy." The mention of the elite school landed like a quiet blow, signaling wealth and influence that rivaled Isadora's new status. Isadora's smile wavered, but she recovered quickly. "How charming," she said, her tone a mask for the calculation beneath. Serafina watched, her mind mapping Isadora's motives. This was no friendly greeting. It was a probe, a test to gauge Serafina's intent. "You have done well for yourself, Isadora," Serafina said, her voice a velvet glove over an iron fist. "This wedding is a masterpiece of ambition." Isadora's eyes narrowed, catching the barb, but she laughed, the sound of a practiced chime. "Thank you, Serafina," she said, her gaze darting to Elias, who stood silent, his eyes still on Lyra. "We are so happy you could witness our joy." The words were a taunt, but Serafina's smile was a shield, unyielding and serene. "Happiness is a rare gift," she said, her tone a quiet promise. "I look forward to seeing how long it lasts." As Isadora retreated, pulling Elias back into the crowd, Serafina felt the moment's weight settle. The dance of motives had begun, and she was ready to lead her every step toward a reckoning that would unravel Isadora's gilded triumph. The ballroom of Harrington Manor thrummed with the pulse of orchestrated revelry, its golden light reflecting off crystal and silver in a dazzling display of Isadora Langley's triumph. The air was thick with the scent of orchids and ambition, each guest a carefully chosen witness to her ascent into the stratosphere of tech royalty. Serafina Voss stood at the heart of this gilded chaos, her sapphire gown a beacon of quiet power that outshone the room's excesses. She was no mere spectator, she was a strategist, her presence a silent challenge to the narrative Isadora had so carefully constructed. Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, stood close, her green eyes, Elias Warwick's eyes, darting across the crowd with a child's unerring instinct for truth. Her dress, a delicate echo of her mother's elegance, drew soft gasps from passers-by, but her focus was on the tension radiating from Serafina's poised frame. "Why does everyone act like they are in a play, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her voice slicing through the hum of polite conversation. "Because some stages are built to hide cracks in the starlight," Serafina replied, her tone calm but sharp as a blade. The crowd flowed around them, a constellation of power brokers, tech innovators, financial titans, media moguls, each a piece in Isadora's chess game of social conquest. Serafina's presence sent ripples through their ranks, her reputation as Voss Enterprises' CEO a magnet for whispered awe. "Serafina Voss is here," one guest murmured, the words carrying the weight of a revelation. her firm is reshaping global commerce." Another added, unaware of the deeper fault line beneath the evening's surface. Serafina cataloged their words, her mind a battlefield where every glance and gesture was a calculated move. Across the room, Isadora glittered in her diamond-encrusted gown, her laughter a practiced melody that charmed the cluster of industry elites around her. But her eyes betrayed her, darting toward Elias, who stood apart, his tailored tuxedo framing a figure taut with unrest. His silver-flecked hair and sharp jawline made him a focal point of admiration, yet his gaze was fractured, searching the crowd until it found Serafina and Lyra. The intensity of his stare was a silent confession, a crack in the facade of the perfect groom that Isadora could not ignore. Serafina met his gaze with icy resolve, her expression a fortress that concealed the storm within. 5 years ago, Elias had been her world, his promises of forever a beacon through her darkest days. Now, he was a stranger bound to another, yet the pull between them was a live wire, sparking with unspoken history.
"Why does he look like he lost something, Mommy?"
Lyra asked, her small hand tightening in Serafina's, her insight piercing the pageantry. "Because some losses are only felt when it is too late, Starlight," Serafina said, her voice steady but laced with purpose. Isadora's smile tightened as she caught Elias's distraction, her fingers gripping her champagne flute with a force that belied her radiant composure. She moved toward him, her gown shimmering like a weapon, and placed a possessive hand on his arm. The gesture was subtle but deliberate, a claim staked before the watching crowd. But Elias's attention remained fractured, his green eyes returning to Serafina, a silent question burning in their depths. Isadora's expression hardened, a flicker of doubt betraying her triumphant facade. She knew the stage was slipping from her grasp. "Serafina Voss, you honor us with your presence." A voice broke her focus, and she turned to face Clara Wentworth, a media magnate whose outlets shaped public narratives. Her smile was polished, her eyes assessing Serafina's gown with a mix of admiration and calculation. "That dress is a statement," she said, her tone carrying the weight of social currency. "Custom, no doubt. Naturally." Serafina replied, her voice smooth as velvet. "Memorable occasions call for memorable choices." The compliment was a probe, and Serafina's response a subtle assertion of her dominance in this rarefied sphere. Clara's gaze shifted to Lyra, her expression softening. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said, genuine warmth breaking through her calculated veneer. "Those eyes are striking." Serafina's smile was faint but deliberate. "She inherited her father's eyes," she said, letting the words hang. She watched as Clara's expression shifted and realized Elias's unmistakable green gaze was reflected in Lyra. The music shifted, signaling a new phase of the reception, and the crowd turned to watch Isadora lead Elias to the center of the room for a toast. Her voice rang out, clear and triumphant, as she thanked the guests for witnessing their union. But Elias's responses were clipped, his smile never reaching his eyes, and Serafina saw the fault line in their performance widen. "Why do they speak like they are reading lines, Mommy?" Lyra whispered, her sharp mind catching the dissonance. "Because some words are meant for others to hear, Starlight," Serafina replied, her voice low but firm. Isadora's toast was a performance masterpiece, each word crafted to cement her new status. But her eyes kept flicking to Serafina, a flicker of unease beneath her radiant smile. She knew the truth of Lyra's existence was a bomb waiting to detonate, and Serafina's presence was the fuse. As the crowd applauded, Isadora's gaze locked onto Serafina's, a silent challenge that carried the weight of their shared history. This was no gesture of friendship. It was a gauntlet, thrown to assert dominance in a game Serafina had no intention of losing. "Serafina Voss, what a surprise," Isadora said, gliding toward them, her gown a cascade of light, her smile a blade disguised as warmth. "I am so glad you could witness our joy." Her words were honeyed, but her eyes were sharp, probing for Serafina's intent. "I would not miss your triumph, Isadora," Serafina replied, her tone a velvet glove over an iron fist. "This is a spectacle worthy of your ambition." The words were a barb, and Isadora's smile tightened, her gaze flicking to Lyra with a flicker of calculation. "And this must be your daughter," Isadora said, her voice syrupy but edged with steel. She is exquisite. Lyra met her gaze with unflinching calm. I am Lyra, she said, her voice clear and steady. I am 6 and I go to Crestwood Academy. The mention of the elite school landed like a quiet blow, signaling wealth and influence that rivaled Isadora's new status. Isadora's smile wavered, but she recovered quickly. How charming, she said, her tone a mask for the unease beneath. You have orchestrated a flawless event, Isadora, Serafina said, her voice a quiet storm. Every detail speaks to your vision. Isadora's eyes narrowed, catching the layered meaning, but she laughed, the sound a practiced chime. Thank you, Serafina, she said, her gaze darting to Elias, who stood silent, his eyes still on Lyra. We are thrilled to share this moment with you. The words were a taunt, but Serafina's smile was a shield, unyielding and serene. Happiness is a fragile thing, Serafina said, her tone a quiet promise. I look forward to seeing how it endures. Isadora's smile froze, her eyes flashing with anger and fear. She turned, pulling Elias back into the crowd, her grip on his arm a silent command. But Elias's gaze lingered on Serafina and Lyra, a silent confession of the fault line running through his new life. As Serafina watched them go, her mind was already mapping the next move, her resolve a weapon sharpened by years of survival. The dance of motives was far from over, and she was ready to lead. The ballroom of Harrington Manor pulsed with the fervor of a grand masquerade, its golden light weaving through crystal chandeliers to cast fleeting shadows across velvet-draped tables. The scent of tuberose and aged champagne hung heavy, a testament to Isadora Langley's ambition to crown herself tech royalty. Yet, beneath the polished laughter and clinking glasses, Serafina Voss's presence stirred a quiet fracture spread. Her sapphire gown shimmered like liquid night, its silk cool against her skin, a silent declaration of power that cut through the room's extravagance. Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, stood close, her green eyes, Elias Warwick's eyes, glimmering with a child's sharp curiosity. Her dress, a delicate echo of her mother's, rustled softly as she moved, drawing soft gasps from guests. Why do people stare like they know us, Mommy? Lyra asked, her voice clear above the murmur of the crowd. Because we carry a story they cannot unread, Starlight. Serafina replied, her tone steady but edged with iron, her hand resting lightly on Lyra's shoulder. The crowd parted as Serafina glided forward, a constellation of power brokers, tech innovators, financiers, media tycoons, pausing to acknowledge her. Her reputation as Voss Enterprises' CEO was a beacon, drawing whispers of awe. Serafina Voss is here, one voice murmured, heavy with reverence. Her firm is rewriting global commerce. Another added, blind to the deeper storm brewing. Serafina's mind was a chessboard, each glance a calculated move in a game Isadora had underestimated. Across the room, Isadora shone in her diamond-encrusted gown, her laughter a practiced chime that charmed a circle of industry elites. But her eyes betrayed her, darting toward Elias, who stood apart, his tailored tuxedo framing a frame taut with unrest. His silver-flecked hair caught the light, his sharp jawline a magnet for admiration, yet his green eyes were shadowed, fixed on Serafina and Lyra with a hunger that spoke of lost years. Why does he look so heavy, Mommy? Lyra whispered, her insight slicing through the pageantry. Because some burdens are carried in silence, Starlight, Serafina said, her voice a quiet blade. Elias broke from Isadora's side, his steps unsteady but purposeful, cutting through the crowd like a man drawn by gravity. Serafina, I need to speak with you, he said, his voice low and raw, his eyes pleading as they met hers. Alone, the request was a spark in dry grass, and Serafina's gaze hardened, her expression a fortress against the man who had once been her world. This is your wedding, Elias, she said, her tone arctic. Your bride might object to private audiences. But Elias pressed closer, his desperation palpable. I did not know about her, about Lyra. If I had, I would have stayed. His words struck like a stone against steel, igniting nothing but Serafina's resolve. Convenient that you find fatherhood now, she said, her voice a whip that cut through his plea. You left Elias. You chose ambition over us. You did not even look back. Lyra's hand tightened in hers, sensing the storm. "Why is he shaking, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small but piercing. "Because some truths tremble before they break starlight," Serafina replied, her eyes never leaving Elias. "I was lied to," Elias said, his voice cracking as he stepped closer, his hands outstretched. "Isadora told me you had moved on and wanted no part of me."
I believed her because I was broken without you. Serafina's expression remained unyielding, a queen unmoved by a supplicant's plea. Poor Elias. She said, her tone laced with scorn that stung deeper than anger. "So easily swayed by a woman with a smile and a scheme. What does that say about the man you are?" Before Elias could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Serafina, you are as formidable as ever." It was Cassandra Reed, a former colleague of Isadora's from her marketing days, her eyes sharp with a knowing glint. She leaned in, her voice low. "I overheard your name and had to see for myself. And this must be your daughter." Her gaze lingered on Lyra, a flicker of recognition passing over her face. "Those eyes, they are Elias's, aren't they?" Serafina's smile was faint but deliberate. "They are," she said, letting the truth hang like a blade. Cassandra's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and calculation. "I worked with Isadora years ago," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She was obsessed with Elias even then. Asked me to dig into his past and his connections. She knew about you, Serafina, knew you were pregnant before he did." The revelation landed like a thunderclap, and Elias's face paled, his gaze darting between Serafina and Cassandra. She knew. Elias breathed, his voice a broken whisper. Serafina's eyes flashed with a fury that could silence empires. "And yet, you married her," she said, her voice a quiet storm. "You built a life on her lies while I built one for your daughter." Cassandra stepped back, sensing the danger, but her words had worked, widening the crack in Elias's world. Isadora's laughter rang out from across the room, brittle and unaware, but Serafina knew the truth was a bomb now ticking louder. "Come, Starlight," she said, taking Lyra's hand. "Let us leave the shadows to their regrets." As they turned, Elias's voice followed, raw and desperate. "Serafina, please." But she did not look back, her resolve a weapon honed by years of survival. The ballroom's golden light faded behind them, but the echo of Cassandra's revelation lingered, a promise of a reckoning that would unravel Isadora's gilded triumph. The terrace of Harrington Manor overlooked a sea of manicured gardens, their shadows swaying under the silver glow of a rising moon. The air was crisp, scented with jasmine, and the faint tang of champagne carried from the ballroom's open doors. Serafina Voss stood at the edge of the stone balustrade, her sapphire gown pooling like ink against the marble, her presence a quiet storm in the night's stillness. The reception's distant music pulsed like a heartbeat, but the truth felt closer, sharper, ready to cut away from the gilded chaos. Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, stood beside her, her green eyes, Elias Warwick's eyes, glimmering with a child's unerring clarity. Her dress rustled softly as she leaned against the balustrade, gazing at the stars. "Why are we out here, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the evening. "Because some battles are fought in quiet places, in starlight," Serafina replied, her tone calm but laced with steel, her hand resting lightly on Lyra's shoulder. Cassandra Reed's revelation still burned in Serafina's mind. Isadora had known about Lyra's existence, had known Serafina was pregnant before Elias did, and had used that knowledge to orchestrate her conquest. The betrayal was a blade, and Serafina was ready to wield it. She had slipped away from the ballroom's clamor, drawing Isadora to this secluded terrace under the pretense of a private word. The stage was set, not for celebration, but for a reckoning that would echo through the years Isadora had stolen. Footsteps clicked against the stone, and Isadora appeared, her diamond-encrusted gown catching the moonlight like a constellation of captured stars. Her smile was a polished mask, but her eyes were wary, sensing the trap. "Serafina, you slipped away," she said, her voice a practiced chime, though a tremor betrayed her. "Let's share a moment to celebrate." Serafina's smile was a blade, sharp and unyielding. "A moment is precisely what I wanted," Isadora, she said, her tone smooth as velvet but heavy with intent. To celebrate your triumph or to mourn what it cost. Isadora's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne flute. What do you mean? She asked, her voice tight, her gaze flicking to Lyra, who watched with quiet curiosity. Serafina stepped closer, her presence a force that seemed to dim the moonlight. I spoke with Cassandra Reed, she said, her words deliberate, each one a stone dropped into still water. She told me you knew about Lyra. Knew I was pregnant before Elias did. Knew and used it to build your throne. The accusation landed like a thunderclap, and Isadora's face paled, her radiant facade cracking under the weight of truth. That is nonsense, she said, her laugh brittle, but her eyes betrayed her, darting toward the ballroom as if seeking escape. Cassandra is mistaken. Serafina's gaze was unrelenting, a queen pinning her prey. Is she said, her voice a quiet storm, or did you study Elias's weaknesses like a predator, using my pain as your map to his heart? Lyra's hand tightened in Serafina's, her green eyes wide. Why does she look scared, Mommy? Lyra asked, her voice small but piercing, cutting through the tension. Because some secrets unravel everything, Starlight, Serafina replied, her tone softening for her daughter but retaining its edge for Isadora. She stepped closer, her gown whispering against the stone. You invited me here to gloat, Isadora, to show me the life you stole. But you forgot one thing. Truths like Lyra do not stay hidden. Isadora's composure fractured, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. You have no proof, she said, her voice rising, a desperate edge creeping in. You cannot undo what is done. Serafina's smile was cold, a crescent moon in a starless sky. Proof is a formality when the truth stands before you, she said, glancing at Lyra, whose presence was a living testament to Isadora's betrayal. You built your victory on lies, and now it trembles. A figure emerged from the shadows, Victor Langley, Isadora's father, his face taut with concern. I heard raised voices, he said, his gaze shifting between the two women. Is everything all right? Serafina turned, her expression serene but lethal. Ask your daughter Victor, she said, her voice carrying the weight of a verdict. Ask her what she knew about Lyra before she claimed Elias. Victor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing his features as he looked at Isadora. I do not know what she is talking about, Father, Isadora said, her voice shrill, her hands trembling. She is trying to ruin my day. Serafina's laugh was low, a sound that chilled the air. Ruin your day, she said, her tone dripping with scorn. You ruined a life, Isadora. Mine, Lyra's, and Elias's. You thought you could rewrite the past, but the past is standing right here. She gestured to Lyra, whose green eyes met Isadora's with unflinching calm. Victor's gaze shifted to Lyra, and the resemblance to Elias struck him like a blow. Is this true, Isadora? He asked, his voice low, his authority as a manufacturing magnate lending weight to the question. Isadora's eyes darted between them, her facade crumbling. It is not what you think, she said, her voice breaking. I loved Elias. I did what I had to do. The admission was a crack, and Serafina seized it, her voice relentless. You loved power, she said, and you used my pain to get it. Lyra tugged at Serafina's hand. Why is she crying, Mommy? She asked, her voice a quiet arrow through the tension. Because some choices leave scars, Starlight, Serafina replied, her eyes never leaving Isadora. Victor stepped forward, his face hardening. We will discuss this later, Isadora, he said, his tone final. Serafina, my apologies. This is not the place. Serafina's smile was a blade. The place is perfect, Victor, she said. Truths belong where lies are celebrated. She took Lyra's hand, guiding her back toward the ballroom, leaving Isadora trembling in the moonlight, Victor's gaze heavy with suspicion. The echoes of absence, Elias's, Lyra's, Serafina's, resonated in the silence, a promise that Isadora's triumph was unraveling. As they re-entered the ballroom's golden glow, Serafina's resolve was a weapon, sharpened by years of survival, ready to carve a reckoning from the ruins of Isadora's gilded lies. The ballroom of Harrington Manor hummed with the warmth of gathered bodies, silk dresses rustling like whispers, and crystal glasses clinking in a delicate chorus. The dance floor gleamed under soft light, its polished oak a stage for Isadora Langley's ascent to the elite sphere. Yet a fracture sliced through the evening's luster, widened by Cassandra Reed's revelation and Serafina Voss's unyielding presence. Serafina stood at the crowd's edge, her sapphire gown a dark flame, its silk cool against her skin, her every glance an arrow poised to pierce Isadora's illusion. Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, stood close, her green eyes, Elias Warwick's eyes, shimmering with a child's sharp clarity. Her dress swished softly as she shifted, drawing soft gasps from guests. "Why does everyone hold their breath, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. "Because some truths stop the world's starlight." Serafina replied, her tone steady but edged with iron, her hand resting lightly on Lyra's shoulder. The music swelled, a waltz drawing eyes to the dance floor's center. Isadora glided into Elias's arms, her diamond-encrusted gown sparkling like a cascade of stars, her smile a polished mask of victory. Elias's movements were stiff, his silver-flecked hair and sharp jawline framing a figure taut with unrest. His green eyes, shadowed by Cassandra's words, that Isadora knew of Lyra before he did, darted toward Serafina and Lyra, a silent plea breaking through his facade. Serafina met his gaze with resolute calm, her expression a fortress hiding the storm within. 5 years ago, Elias had been her haven, his promises of forever a light through her darkest nights. Now, he was bound to a lie, yet the pull between them sparked like a live wire. "Why does he dance like he is trapped, Mommy?" Lyra whispered, her insight slicing through the pageantry. "Because some chains are forged by starlight," Serafina said, her voice a quiet storm. Isadora's smile tightened, her fingers digging into Elias's shoulder as they moved, the crowd's hush amplifying her unease. Elias's steps faltered, a misstep drawing gasps, and he stopped abruptly, his hands dropping from Isadora's waist. "Isadora, why did you not tell me?" he demanded, his voice low but carrying across the silent ballroom, raw with anger and betrayal. "Why did you keep her from me?" The question was a thunderclap, and Isadora's face paled, her radiant facade cracking. "What are you talking about, Elias?" she said, her laugh brittle, her eyes darting to Serafina. "You are making a scene." "You knew about Lyra," Elias said, his voice rising, each word a blow. "Cassandra told me. You knew Serafina was pregnant, and you lied. Said she had moved on." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling like a breeze through reeds, heads turning toward Serafina and Lyra. Isadora's hands trembled, clutching her gown. "That is absurd," she said, her voice shrill. "Cassandra is mistaken. I loved you, Elias. I did what was best." But her words faltered, the crowd's silence a weight she could not lift. Serafina stepped forward, Lyra at her side, her movement parting the crowd like a tide. "You loved power, Isadora," she said, her voice clear and unrelenting, ringing across the ballroom. "You used my pain to build your empire. Lyra is the truth you thought you could bury, but she stands here now." Lyra's green eyes met Isadora's, unflinching, her innocence amplifying Serafina's words. The crowd gasped, the revelation sinking in, the crack in Isadora's facade now a chasm. Elias turned to Serafina, his face etched with anguish. "I did not know," he said, his voice breaking, hands outstretched as if to grasp a lost past. "If I had, I would have stayed." Serafina's gaze was ice, her voice a lash. "You chose to leave Elias," she said. "You chose ambition over us. The cost stands before you." Lyra's hand tightened in hers, her voice piercing the silence. "Why is he so angry, Mommy?" "Because some truths burn starlight." Serafina replied, her eyes locked on Elias. A voice broke the tension. "Elias, what is this?" Victor Langley, Isadora's father, stepped forward, his face stern, his magnate's authority lending weight to his words. "Is this true?" Isadora's eyes darted to him, her composure crumbling. "Father, it is not what you think," she said, her voice desperate. "I did it for love." Victor's gaze shifted to Lyra, her resemblance to Elias undeniable, and his expression hardened. "We will discuss this later," he said, his tone final, his eyes flicking to Serafina, with respect and unease. The music resumed, a feeble attempt to restore order, but the crowd focused on the fractured trio. Isadora clutched Elias's arm, her voice a hiss. "Do not ruin this, Elias." But he pulled away, his eyes on Lyra, a father seeing his daughter for the first time. Serafina took Lyra's hand, guiding her from the dance floor. "Come, Starlight," she said, her voice steady. "Let them face their cracks." As they moved through the crowd, Serafina's resolve was a weapon, honed by years of survival, ready to carve a reckoning from Isadora's shattered facade. The private lounge of Harrington Manor thrummed with the low hum of whispered gossip, its velvet curtains muffling the ballroom's fading music. Crystal tumblers clinked with ice, their amber contents catching the glow of sconces that cast long shadows across leather armchairs. The air was heavy with cigar smoke and the weight of secrets, as guests retreated from the dance floor's chaos to dissect the fracture in Isadora Langley's triumph. Serafina Voss stood near a marble fireplace, her sapphire gown a dark flame against the lounge's opulence, her presence a silent command that drew every eye. Lyra, her 6-year-old daughter, sat on a cushioned stool, her green eyes, Elias Warwick's eyes, glimmering with a child's sharp clarity. Her dress rustled softly as she swung her legs, her gaze darting across the room's hushed conversations. "Why are they whispering about us, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her voice piercing the murmur like a bell. "Because truths make people talk, Starlight," Serafina replied, her tone calm but edged with steel, her hand resting lightly on Lyra's shoulder. The crowd's reaction to Elias's outburst on the dance floor had shifted the evening's tide. His accusation, that Isadora knew of Lyra's existence and lied, had rippled through the guests, turning their polite applause into a chorus of speculation. Tech moguls, financiers, and media tycoons now clustered in the lounge, their voices low but urgent, dissecting the revelation that threatened Isadora's carefully crafted coronation. Serafina's presence was the spark, her reputation as Voss Enterprises' CEO amplifying every whisper. Serafina Voss was there. One guest murmured, the words heavy with awe. "She is the one who shook the stage." Across the room, Isadora stood near a mahogany bar, her diamond-encrusted gown dulled by the lounge's dim light. Her smile was a fragile mask, her hands trembling as she clutched a glass, her eyes darting to Elias, who leaned against a wall, his tailored tuxedo framing a figure taut with unrest. His silver-flecked hair caught the sconce's glow, but his green eyes were shadowed, fixed on the floor as if searching for answers in its grain. The weight of Cassandra's revelation, that Isadora had known of Lyra's existence, pressed on him, a burden he could not shed. Serafina met his fleeting glance with unyielding resolve, her expression a fortress hiding the storm within. 5 years ago, Elias had been her anchor, his promises of forever a light through her darkest nights. Now he was a stranger bound to a lie, yet the pull between them was a live wire, sparking with unspoken history. "Why does he look so lost, Mommy?" Lyra whispered, her insight cutting through the lounge's haze. "Because some truths leave you adrift in starlight," Serafina said, her voice a quiet arrow, her gaze steady on the unfolding drama. Isadora's composure faltered as she caught the crowd's whispers, her fingers tightening around her glass. She moved toward Elias, her gown swishing like a warning, and placed a possessive hand on his arm. "Elias, we need to present a united front," she hissed, her voice low but desperate. "The guests are watching." But Elias pulled away, his eyes lifting to Serafina and Lyra, a silent confession of the fracture in his world. Isadora's face paled, her facade cracking under the weight of their scrutiny. "Serafina Voss, you always draw the eye." A voice broke the tension, and Serafina turned to face Nora Kessler, a journalist whose investigative pieces shaped public narratives. Her smile was sharp, her eyes glinting with the hunger of a story uncovered. "That gown is a statement," she said, her tone laced with curiosity. "You planned this moment, did you not?" Serafina's smile was faint but deliberate. "Some moments plan themselves, Nora," she replied, her voice smooth as silk. "Truths have a way of surfacing." Nora's gaze shifted to Lyra, her expression softening. "Your daughter is striking," she said, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Those eyes are Elias Warwick's, are they not?" Serafina nodded, her voice steady. "They are," she said, letting the truth hang like a blade. Nora leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I knew Isadora at Yale. She was always calculating. I once saw her manipulate a rival out of a scholarship with a forged letter. She knew how to bury truths. The revelation was a spark, and Serafina's eyes flashed, her mind seizing the new weapon. Isadora caught the exchange, her face tightening as she sensed the shift. She glided toward them, her smile a brittle shield. "Serafina Nora, what a surprise," she said, her voice honeyed but edged with panic. "Enjoying the evening?" Serafina's gaze was unrelenting, a queen pinning her prey. "We were discussing buried truths, Isadora," she said, her tone a quiet storm. "Like the ones you kept from Elias about Lyra." Isadora's glass trembled, her laugh forced. "That is nonsense," she said, her eyes darting to Nora. "You have no proof." "The proof is in the eyes of the witnesses," Serafina said, gesturing to Lyra, whose green gaze met Isadora's with unflinching calm. The crowd's whispers grew louder, their eyes shifting between the women, sensing a story unfolding. Nora's pen hovered over her notebook, her voice low. "I have sources who can confirm your tactics, Isadora," she said. "This could make headlines." Isadora's face paled, her facade crumbling as the weight of witnesses pressed down. Elias stepped forward, his voice raw. "Is it true, Isadora?" he asked, his green eyes burning with betrayal. "Did you bury my daughter for me?" Isadora's hands shook, her voice rising. "I did it for us, Elias," she said, desperation creeping in for our future. Elias's face hardened, his voice a low growl. "You stole my past." The crowd gasped, their murmurs a rising tide, as Victor Langley appeared, his face stern. "Enough," he said, his magnate's authority cutting through. "Isadora, we will address this privately." Serafina took Lyra's hand, her voice steady. "Come, Starlight," she said, guiding her toward the lounge's exit. "Let the witnesses carry the weight." As they stepped into the ballroom's fading light, the crowd's whispers followed, a chorus that promised Isadora's triumph was unraveling under the weight of their gaze. The grand staircase of Harrington Manor loomed like a marble sentinel, its polished steps catching the flicker of torches as guests began their descent into the night. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of dew-soaked roses and the fading echo of the ballroom's music. Serafina Voss stood at the top, her sapphire gown a dark cascade against the stone, her presence a quiet storm that held the departing crowd in its thrall. This was no mere exit. "Why are they all looking up at us, Mommy?" Lyra asked, her voice clear against the murmur of footsteps. "Because some truths demand an audience, Starlight," Serafina replied, her tone steady but sharp as a blade, her hand resting lightly on Lyra's shoulder. The night's revelations, Cassandra's disclosure, Serafina's terrace confrontation, Elias's dance floor outburst, and Nora's whispered insights, had fractured Isadora's carefully crafted coronation. The guests, a constellation of tech moguls, financiers, and media tycoons, now lingered on the... Her smile was a fragile mask, her eyes darting between the crowd and Serafina, sensing the tide turning against her. Elias stood rigid, his tailored tuxedo framing a figure taut with resolve, his silver-flecked hair catching the light. His green eyes, once shadowed by regret, now burned with clarity, fixed on Serafina and Lyra as if seeing them for the first time. The weight of Isadora's deception, that she knew of Lyra and lied, anchored him to a new truth. Serafina met his gaze with unyielding calm, her expression a fortress hiding the storm within. 5 years ago, Elias had been her world, his promises of forever alight through her darkest nights. Now, he was a man awakening from a lie, and the pull between them was a spark ready to ignite. "Why does he look like he found something, Mommy?" Lyra whispered, her insight piercing the night's tension. "Because some truths set you free, Starlight," Serafina said, her voice a quiet arrow, her gaze steady on the unfolding drama. Isadora's fingers tightened on Elias's arm, her voice a desperate hiss. "Elias, we must leave together," she said, her eyes pleading with the crowd for salvation. "They cannot judge us." But Elias pulled away, his face hardening as he approached Serafina. "Isadora, you stole my daughter. You used my pain to steal a life, and now it unravels before those who matter most." The crowd parted, their eyes fixed on Serafina,
a queen commanding her court. Nora Kessler, the journalist, stood among them, her notebook open, her pen poised. "This is a story the world will hear," she said, her voice sharp and intent. "Isadora's manipulation will not stay buried." Isadora's face paled, her breath catching as the weight of witnesses pressed down. Elias turned to Serafina, his voice raw. "I was blind," he said, his green eyes meeting Lyra's. "I want to know her, Serafina. I want to be the father I should have been." Serafina's gaze was ice, her voice a lash. "You had 5 years, Elias," she said. "Lyra has a mother who never faltered, a home where she is cherished, and a future I built alone. What can you offer but promises already broken?" Lyra's hand tightened, her voice piercing the silence. "Why is he crying, Mommy?" "Because some regrets are heavier than tears, Starlight," Serafina replied, her eyes never leaving Elias, her resolve unyielding. Victor Langley emerged from the crowd, his face stern, his magnate's authority cutting through. "Isadora, this ends now," he said, his tone final. "You have shamed our name." Isadora stood alone, her gown a faded glory, as Serafina and Lyra stepped into the night, their bond a fortress, their future a weapon forged from years of survival, ready to redefine the world beyond Harrington Manor's gilded lies.